Marcus Thompson had been planning this London vacation for 2 years. At 25, he worked as a construction manager in Chicago and had saved every penny to make this dream trip happen. London was everything he had imagined: the red buses, the old buildings, and the rich history that seemed to live in every street corner. On his 3rd day in the city, Marcus decided to visit Horse Guards Parade. I'd seen pictures of the famous mounted guards online and couldn't wait to get some photos to show his friends back home. The morning was bright and clear, perfect for sightseeing and taking pictures that would make everyone jealous of his European adventure. Marcus walked through St. James's Park, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere before the crowds arrived. He loved how different London felt from Chicago: the accents, the old architecture, and the sense that important history had happened on these very streets. Every corner seemed to have a story, and Marcus wanted to experience as much as possible during his week-long stay. When he reached Horse Guards Parade, Marcus was amazed by what he saw. 2 magnificent black horses stood perfectly still, each carrying a guard in a shining helmet and red uniform. The horses were beautiful, strong, well-groomed, and trained to stand motionless despite the busy London traffic nearby. The guards sat straight in their saddles, looking ahead with serious expressions that showed their commitment to duty. Marcus pulled out his phone and started taking pictures from different angles. He moved around the guards, trying to get the perfect shot. With the historic buildings in the background, other tourists were doing the same thing, and everyone seemed respectful and careful to maintain a proper distance from the horses and riders. After taking several photos, Marcus noticed that some tourists were getting closer to the horses than others. A few brave visitors had managed to stand right next to the animals for photos, and the guards hadn't said anything to stop them. Marcus watched as a family from Germany took turns posing beside one of the horses while their father snapped pictures with an expensive camera. The idea started forming in Marcus's mind as he watched the other tourists. If he could get really close to one of the horses, maybe even touch it, he would have an amazing photo that none of his friends could match. He imagined posting the picture on social media with a caption about his adventure in London. Would definitely get more likes and comments than the usual tourist photos. Marcus studied the situation more carefully. The guards seemed focused straight ahead, not paying attention to the tourists around them. The horses appeared calm and gentle, standing quietly despite all the activity. He had grown up around animals on his grandfather's farm in Iowa, so he felt comfortable approaching horses. These royal horses were probably well-trained and used to people, he reasoned. Several other tourists had touched the horses without any problems. Marcus had seen a woman pet one horse's neck while her husband took a photo, and the guard hadn't reacted at all. A teenager had even managed to get a selfie while standing right next to one of the animals. If they could do it safely, surely he could too. Marcus decided to wait for the right moment when fewer people were around. He wanted his photo to be special, not crowded with other tourists in the background. The morning was still early, and he hoped to get his perfect shot before the area became too busy with the usual London crowds. As he waited, Marcus watched the horses more closely. They were truly impressive animals, tall, strong, and beautifully groomed. Their black coats shined in the morning sun, and their tack was perfectly polished. These were clearly special horses, trained for this important duty of guarding one of London's most historic locations. The horse on the left seemed particularly calm and friendly. Marcus noticed that it had occasionally turned its head slightly when tourists approached, almost as if it was curious about the visitors. This horse would be perfect for his photo opportunity. Marcus began planning his approach, thinking about how to get close enough for an impressive picture without being too obvious about what he was doing. Marcus checked his phone to make sure he had enough battery life and storage space for photos. He adjusted his camera settings to make sure he would get the best possible picture. This was going to be the highlight of his London trip, and he wanted everything to be perfect. The guard on the left horse sat perfectly still, his eyes looking straight ahead toward the street. His uniform was immaculate, with shiny buttons and perfectly placed insignia. The man looked to be in his 30s, with a serious expression that showed his dedication to his duty. Marcus admired the discipline it must take to sit so still for hours while tourists crowded around taking pictures. As Marcus prepared to make his move, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had never done anything like this before, but the opportunity seemed too good to pass up. He would approach slowly and carefully, just like he had seen the other tourists do. He would get his amazing photo and then step back quickly, before anyone could object. What Marcus didn't understand was that there was a big difference between the respectful behavior he had observed from other tourists and what he was planning to do. The successful interactions he had witnessed involved people who approached the horses with proper respect and awareness of boundaries. Marcus was about to cross a line that would change his entire London experience in ways he never could have imagined. Marcus took a deep breath and started walking toward the horse on the left. His heart was beating faster with each step, but he tried to look casual and confident. He had his phone ready in his right hand, prepared to take the perfect selfie that would amaze everyone back home. The horse was even more impressive up close. Marcus could see the individual hairs in its shiny black mane and the careful attention to detail in its grooming. The animal stood about 17 hands high, making it much larger than the horses he remembered from his grandfather's farm. Its muscles were well developed from years of training and daily exercise through London's streets. As Marcus got closer, he started to notice things he hadn't seen from a distance. The horse's eyes were alert and intelligent, constantly watching the activity around it. Its ears moved occasionally, picking up sounds from different directions. This was clearly a highly trained animal, not just a gentle farm horse used to casual handling by strangers. The guard sitting on the horse remained perfectly still, but Marcus could sense a subtle change in the atmosphere. Other tourists nearby seemed to step back slightly as Marcus approached, though he didn't understand why. A few people were watching him with expressions that looked concerned, but Marcus assumed they were just interested in what he was doing. When Marcus was about 3 feet from the horse, he stopped and raised his phone to take a selfie. The angle wasn't quite right, so he stepped closer. Now, within arm's reach of the animal, he could smell the horse's clean scent and hear its steady breathing. The horse's head turned slightly toward him, and Marcus could see his own reflection. In its large, dark eye, Marcus smiled broadly and held up his phone to capture the moment. He was so focused on getting the perfect angle for his photo that he didn't notice the horse's ears had moved. He didn't see the subtle tension that had entered the animal's posture. Most importantly, he didn't realize that. The guard above him was no longer looking straight ahead, but was now watching Marcus's every movement, feeling bold and excited about his amazing photo opportunity. Marcus decided to make the picture even better. Instead of just standing next to the horse, he reached out with his free hand to touch the animal's neck. He thought this would create an even more impressive image that would really stand out on social media. The moment Marcus's hand made contact with the horse's neck, everything changed. The horse immediately stepped sideways, away from the unexpected touch. Its head came up sharply, and it snorted with surprise and displeasure. The sudden movement was so quick and powerful that Marcus stumbled backward, nearly dropping his phone. "Step away from the horse immediately," came a sharp command from above. The guard's voice was calm but carried absolute authority that cut through all the ambient noise of the busy London street. Marcus looked up to see the guard staring directly at him with steely blue eyes that showed no trace of the casual tolerance he had expected. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment as he realized that everyone around him was now staring. The other tourists had backed away further, creating a clear space around him and the horse. Some people were taking pictures of the situation, but not the kind of pictures Marcus had wanted to be part of. "I was just trying to get a photo," Marcus said weakly, his Chicago accent sounding particularly American in the tense silence. "I didn't mean any harm." The guard's expression didn't change. "These are working military horses, not tourist attractions. You have interfered with a Queen's Guard animal in the performance of its duties." Marcus suddenly realized how serious this situation had become. What had seemed like harmless fun was clearly being treated as something much more significant. The horse continued to show signs of agitation, shifting its weight and tossing its head slightly. The guard's attention was now completely focused on Marcus rather than his official duties. A police officer who had been patrolling nearby began walking toward the scene. Marcus felt a growing sense of panic as he understood that his simple attempt to get a good photo had turned into something that was attracting official attention. His fun London vacation was suddenly taking a very different turn. "Sir, I need you to step back to a safe distance," the police officer said as he approached. His tone was professional but firm. "These horses are trained military animals, and interfering with them is a serious matter." Marcus backed away from the horse, his hand shaking slightly as he put his phone in his pocket. He wanted to explain that he hadn't meant to cause any trouble, that he was just a tourist who didn't understand the rules. But the serious expressions on the faces around him made it clear that his intentions didn't matter as much as his actions. The horse was beginning to calm down now that Marcus had moved away. But the damage was already done. The guard remained alert and focused on the situation, and the police officer was clearly preparing to take some kind of action. Other tourists were whispering among themselves and pointing at Marcus, making him feel even more embarrassed and confused. Marcus realized that his lack of understanding about British customs and the seriousness of the Queen's guard duties had gotten him into real trouble. What had seemed like a harmless photo opportunity was turning to a situation that could have serious consequences for the rest of his London visit. The police officer was now talking into his radio, calling for additional support or reporting the incident to his supervisors. Marcus could hear fragments of the conversation, including words like interference with Queen's Guard duties and American tourist incident. His heart sank as he realized that this situation was being treated as a formal incident rather than a simple misunderstanding. Within minutes, 2 additional police officers arrived at the scene. Marcus watched with growing anxiety as they spoke quietly with the first officer, occasionally glancing in his direction. The situation was clearly being taken more seriously than he had ever imagined possible. What had started as a simple photo opportunity was becoming a major incident that was disrupting the entire area. The mounted guard finally spoke again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with similar situations before. "Officer, this individual made physical contact with my horse despite being in a clearly marked restricted area. The animal was startled and could have been injured, or could have injured someone else." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he heard these words. He looked around desperately for the signs or barriers that the guard mentioned. And for the first time, he noticed the subtle markings on the ground and the small signs that he had completely ignored in his excitement to get close to the horses. His lack of attention to these details was now creating serious problems for him. "Sir, I need to see your identification," one of the new officers said to Marcus. "We need to document this incident and determine what charges may be appropriate." Charges. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had come to London for a fun vacation, and now he was potentially facing criminal charges in a foreign country. His hands trembled as he pulled out his passport and driver's license, handing them to the officer while trying to process what was happening to him. The officer examined Marcus's documents carefully, making notes in a small notebook. "Mr. Thompson, you're here on a tourist visa, is that correct? How long have you been in the UK?" 3 days, Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm supposed to be here for a week. This is my first time in London." The crowd of tourists around them had grown larger, with people taking pictures and videos of the entire incident. Marcus realized with horror that his mistake was being documented by dozens of people and would probably end up on social media within hours. Instead of being the star of his own amazing London photos, he was becoming an example of what not to do as a tourist. A sergeant arrived to assess the situation, speaking briefly with the mounted guard and the other officers. Marcus could see them pointing at him and discussing something serious. The horse had calmed down completely by now, but the disruption to the normal routine was obvious. Other tourists were being asked to maintain a greater distance, and the entire atmosphere around the horse guards had changed. "Mr. Thompson," the sergeant said, approaching Marcus with a serious expression, "you've interfered with a Queen's Guard in the performance of official duties. This is considered a serious offense under British law. The horse you touched is a trained military animal. Your actions could have resulted in injury to yourself, the animal, or other members of the public." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as the full reality of his situation became clear. "Officer, I swear I didn't know it was illegal. I saw other people taking pictures near the horses and I thought it was okay. I would never intentionally do anything to hurt an animal or cause problems." "The issue isn't your intent, sir," the sergeant replied. "The issue is your actions and their potential consequences. These horses are not pets or photo props. They're working military animals with specialized training, and they can be dangerous when startled or threatened." One of the officers returned from his radio conversation with news that made Marcus's heart sink even further. "Sergeant, we've been instructed to escort Mr. Thompson to the station for formal processing. The incident needs to be properly documented, and there may be additional charges related to interfering with royal duties." Marcus looked around desperately, hoping somehow that this was all a misunderstanding that could be cleared up quickly. But the serious expressions on every official face told him that his problems were just beginning. His dream vacation was turning into a nightmare that could have consequences he was only beginning to understand. "Am I being arrested?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking with fear and embarrassment. "You're being detained for questioning and processing," the sergeant explained. "Whether formal charges are filed will depend on several factors, including the assessment of the incident and your cooperation with our investigation." As the officers prepared to escort Marcus away from Horse Guard's parade, he took one last look at the horse he had touched. The animal stood calmly now, back to its professional demeanor, as if nothing had happened. But Marcus knew that his few seconds of contact with that horse had changed everything about his London experience. The mounted guard remained at his post, having returned to his professional silence and forward gaze. But Marcus could see that the incident had required the guard to break from his normal duties to deal with the situation Marcus had created. The disruption went beyond just startling a horse. It had interfered with an important ceremonial and security function that had been performed the same way for hundreds of years. Other tourists watched with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. As Marcus was led away from the area, some looked, shocked that such a simple action could have such serious consequences. Others seemed to understand immediately that Marcus had crossed a line that should have been obvious to anyone with common sense and respect for British institutions. As they walked toward the police vehicle, Marcus tried to think about what he would tell his family and friends back home. How could he explain that his London vacation had been ruined by a single moment of poor judgment? How would he handle the potential legal and financial consequences of his mistake? His mind raced, with questions and fears about what would happen next. The ride to the police station felt like the longest 10 minutes of Marcus's life. He sat in the back of the police car, watching London pass by through the window, realizing that he was seeing the city from a completely different perspective than he had planned. The excitement of his vacation had been replaced by fear, embarrassment, and confusion about what would happen next. At the station, Marcus was processed through a system he had only seen in movies and television shows. His fingerprints were taken, his photo was captured, and he was asked to empty his pockets into a plastic bag. The routine efficiency of the process made him understand how serious his situation had become. This wasn't a warning or a simple misunderstanding. That could be cleared up with an apology. Detective Inspector Sarah Wilson was assigned to handle Marcus's case. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind but serious eyes that had seen many tourist incidents over her 20 years of service. She led Marcus to a small interview room and offered him a cup of tea, which he accepted gratefully, needing something to calm his nerves. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Wilson began, opening a file folder, "I want you to understand exactly what happened today and why we're treating this as a serious matter. The Queen's Guard horses aren't just ceremonial animals. They're working military horses that are part of our national security infrastructure." Marcus listened carefully, finally beginning to understand the gravity of what he had done. "I honestly didn't know," he said quietly. "In America, we don't have anything quite like this. I thought they were just part of a tourist display, Detective." Wilson nodded understandingly. "That's a common misconception among visitors. But these horses are trained to respond to threats. Unexpected physical contact can trigger defensive reactions that could result in serious injuries. The horse you touched is trained to kick or bite if it feels threatened. You were very Lucky that it only moved away from you. The detective showed Marcus several photos of incidents involving Queen's Guard horses over the years. Some showed people being knocked down by startled animals. Others showed injuries that had required medical attention. Marcus felt sick as he realized how much worse his situation could have been. "The guard you interfered with today is Trooper James Harrison," Detective Wilson continued. "He's been serving with the Household Cavalry for 8 years, and his horse, Wellington, is a 12-year-old gelding with specialized training in crowd control and ceremonial duties. When you touched Wellington, you created a security breach that required immediate response." Marcus was beginning to understand that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. "What happens now? Am I going to jail?" "That depends on several factors," Detective Wilson explained. "The Crown Prosecution Service will review the incident and determine what charges, if any, should be filed. Possible charges include interfering with military duties, endangering public safety, and violation of restricted area regulations." The detective pulled out a sheet of paper with information about each potential charge and the associated penalties. Marcus's eyes widened as he read about possible fines ranging from hundreds to thousands of pounds, and potential jail sentences of up to 6 months for the most serious charges. However, Detective Wilson added, seeing Marcus's obvious distress, "First-time offenders who show genuine remorse and cooperation often receive more lenient treatment. The fact that no one was injured and that you clearly didn't understand the seriousness of your actions will be considered in your favor." Marcus felt a small sense of relief, but he was still overwhelmed by the potential consequences of his mistake. "Is there anything I can do to make this better? I feel terrible about what happened." Detective Wilson made some notes in her file. "Your cooperation and obvious remorse are already being documented. We'll also need a formal statement from you, describing exactly what happened and why you made the decision to approach and touch the horse." Over the next hour, Marcus provided a detailed statement about his actions at Horse Guards Parade. He explained his excitement about visiting London, his desire to get impressive photos, and his complete misunderstanding of the rules and significance of the Queen's Guard. Detective Wilson asked careful questions to ensure that Marcus's statement was complete and accurate. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand something important," Detective Wilson said as they finished the statement. "The Queen's Guard traditions go back hundreds of years. These ceremonies and duties represent continuity, discipline, and national pride for British people. When tourists interfere with these traditions, it's not just a matter of breaking rules. It's seen as disrespectful to our culture and history." Marcus nodded, finally beginning to grasp the cultural significance of what he had done. "I would never want to disrespect British culture. I came here because I admire your history and traditions. I just didn't understand how important the guards and horses were." The detective seemed to appreciate Marcus's sincerity. "That's clear from your statement and your behavior today. The fact that you're genuinely sorry and willing to accept responsibility for your actions will be noted in my report." After completing the formal interview, Marcus was told that he would be released on bail while the Crown Prosecution Service reviewed his case. This meant he could continue his vacation, but he had to report to the police station every day and couldn't leave the country until his case was resolved. "How long will this process take?" Marcus asked, worried about his job back home and the cost of extending his stay in London. "Typically 2 to 3 weeks for cases like this," Detective Wilson replied. "I know that's longer than you plan to stay, but these things take time to process properly." As Marcus signed his bail documents, he realized that his week-long vacation had just become a month-long ordeal. He would have to call his boss, extend his hotel stay, and figure out how to afford the additional expenses. Most importantly, he would have to live with the stress and uncertainty of not knowing what punishment he might face for his moment of poor judgment. Walking out of the police station into the London afternoon, Marcus felt like a completely different person than the excited tourist who had approached Horse Guards Parade that morning. His mistake had taught him a harsh lesson about respecting local customs and understanding the significance of cultural traditions. But the full cost of that education was still unknown. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Marcus's life. Every morning he woke up in his London hotel room with a knot in his stomach. remembering that he wasn't a carefree tourist anymore, but someone waiting to learn his fate in a foreign legal system. The daily check-ins at the police station became a routine that reminded him constantly of his mistake. Marcus had to make several difficult phone calls back home. His boss at the construction company was understanding but concerned about Marcus's extended absence. His parents were worried and upset when they learned what had happened. His friends were shocked that their fun-loving buddy had gotten into serious legal trouble over what seemed like such a simple mistake. "I can't believe you touched a guard's horse," his best friend Jake said during one of their daily phone calls. "Didn't you realize that was probably not allowed?" Marcus had asked himself the same question hundreds of times over the past weeks. "It seems so obvious now, but at the time, I just saw other tourists getting close to the horses. I thought it was okay. I was so focused on getting a good photo that I didn't think about the consequences." The financial strain of his extended stay was becoming serious. Marcus had budgeted for a week in London, not a month. His hotel costs had multiplied. He was having to eat cheap meals and skip the tourist attractions he had planned to visit. Every day he remained in London was costing him money he didn't have. But he had no choice but to stay until his case was resolved. Detective Wilson had told Marcus that he could explore London while waiting for his court date. But his heart wasn't in sightseeing anymore. Every time he saw police officers or military personnel, he was reminded of his situation. When he walked past Buckingham Palace or other royal sites, he felt embarrassed and ashamed of what he had done. During his second week of waiting, Marcus decided to do some research about the Queen's Guard and British military traditions. He spent hours in the London Library, reading about the history of the household cavalry and the significance of the ceremonial duties he had interrupted. The more he learned, the worse he felt about his actions. He discovered that the Queen's Guard horses underwent years of special training to perform their duties. They were selected for their calm temperament and intelligence, then trained to remain steady in crowds, ignore distractions, and respond appropriately to various situations. The horse he had touched, Wellington, was mentioned in several articles. As an exemplary military horse who had served in numerous important ceremonies, Marcus also learned about Trooper Harrison, the guard he had distracted from his duties. Harrison came from a military family and had earned his position through exceptional service and dedication. Reading about the guard's background made Marcus realize that his thoughtless action had affected a real person who took his responsibilities seriously. The knowledge Marcus gained during his research made him feel even worse about his mistake. But it also gave him a deeper appreciation for British military traditions. He began to understand why his actions had been treated so seriously, and why so many people had been upset by what he had done. On his 15th day in London, Marcus received a call from Detective Wilson asking him to come to the station for an update on his case. His heart pounded as he made the familiar walk to the police station, wondering if this would be the day he learned his fate. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Wilson said when he arrived, "I have some news about your case. The Crown Prosecution Service has completed their review, and they've decided not to file criminal charges against you." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but Detective Wilson held up her hand to indicate she wasn't finished. "However, they are requiring you to pay a substantial fine and to perform community service as a condition of avoiding prosecution. You'll also be required to attend a cultural awareness program about British institutions and traditions." The fine was larger than Marcus had hoped, but smaller than he had feared. The community service would involve helping with maintenance at a military museum, and the cultural awareness program would take 2 days to complete. Most importantly, he would be free to return to America once he had fulfilled these requirements. "There's one more thing," Detective Wilson added. "Trooper Harrison has requested to meet with you. It's not required, but he wanted the opportunity to speak with you about what happened." Marcus was nervous about meeting the guard he had caused trouble for, but he felt it was important to apologize in person. They arranged to meet at a cafe near Horse Guards Parade the following afternoon. When Marcus arrived at the cafe, he immediately recognized Trooper Harrison, even though he was wearing civilian clothes. The guard was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in his late 20s, with short brown hair and the straight posture that came from years of military training. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," Harrison said, extending his hand for a handshake.
Thank
You for agreeing to meet with me? Marcus shook the guard's hand, feeling nervous and embarrassed. I owe you a huge apology. I'm so sorry for what I did. I had no idea how serious it was or how much trouble I would cause. Harrison nodded and gestured for them to sit down.
Oh.
I wanted to meet with you because I think there's a teachable moment here. What you did was wrong, but I can see that you genuinely didn't understand why. Over coffee, Harrison explained to Marcus what it was like to serve as a Queen's Guard. He talked about the pride he felt in maintaining centuries-old traditions and the responsibility he carried to represent the best of British military service. He also explained how dangerous it could be when untrained people interfered with the horses. Wellington is usually very calm, Harrison said, but he's trained to protect himself and me if he feels threatened. If he had kicked or bitten you, you could have been seriously injured. That's why we take these incidents so seriously. Marcus listened carefully, asking questions and trying to understand the perspective of someone who had dedicated his life to military service. By the end of their conversation, he had a much deeper appreciation for what the Queen's Guards did and why their duties were so important to British culture. I want you to know that I've learned a lot from this experience, Marcus told Harrison as they prepared to leave. I'll never make a mistake like this again. And I'll make sure other people understand how important it is to respect your work, Harrison smiled for the first time during their meeting. Oh, that's all we can ask for. Mistakes happen, but what matters is what we learn from them. Marcus spent his final week in London, completing his community service at the National Army Museum, working alongside museum staff and volunteers. He helped maintain exhibits about British military history and assisted with educational programs for school children. The work was meaningful and gave him a chance to contribute something positive after his mistake. During his time at the museum, Marcus met several military veterans who shared their stories about service and sacrifice. He heard about soldiers who had given their lives defending freedom, and others who had dedicated decades to serving their country with honor and distinction. These conversations helped him understand that his interference with Trooper Harrison's duties had been more than just a simple mistake. It had been disrespectful to a tradition of service that meant everything to these men and women. The Cultural Awareness Program was held at a government building in Westminster. Marcus joined 12 other people who had committed various offenses related to British institutions and traditions. Most were tourists like himself, but a few were local residents who had gotten into trouble during protests or other incidents. The program instructor was a retired colonel named Margaret Phillips, who had spent 30 years in the British Army. She had a no-nonsense approach, but was also patient with people who genuinely wanted to learn from their mistakes. The Queen's Guard isn't just a tourist attraction, Colonel Phillips explained to the group. These are active military personnel performing real duties that are essential to our national security and constitutional monarchy. When you interfere with their work, you're interfering with functions that have kept our democracy stable for centuries. Marcus raised his hand during one of the sessions. Colonel, I understand now how serious my mistake was, but how can tourists know what's acceptable and what isn't? I honestly thought I was just taking a picture with a horse. Colonel Phillips nodded approvingly at the question. That's exactly why this program exists. Education is the key to preventing these incidents. Every year we have hundreds of cases involving tourists who didn't understand the significance of what they were doing. The colonel showed the group videos of proper behavior around Queen's Guard posts, explaining the history and significance of various ceremonies, and teaching them how to be respectful visitors to royal and military sites. Marcus took careful notes, wishing he had known this information before his trip began. On his final day in the program, Marcus was asked to write a reflection essay about his experience and what he had learned. He wrote about his initial excitement as a tourist, his thoughtless decision to touch the horse, and the serious consequences that followed. But he also wrote about the kindness of people like Detective Wilson and Trooper Harrison who had helped him understand his mistake without treating him like a criminal. This experience has taught me that respect for other cultures isn't just about being polite, Marcus wrote in his essay. It's about taking the time to understand why things are important to other people, even if they don't seem important to you at first. The Queen's Guard horses aren't just animals, they're symbols of British pride, tradition, and continuity that deserve the same respect you would show to a flag or a monument. When Marcus completed all his requirements and was finally free to return home, he felt like a completely different person than the tourist who had arrived in London a month earlier. His extended stay had cost him thousands of dollars and caused stress for his family and employer. But it had also taught him lessons he would never forget. On his last morning in London, Marcus returned to Horse Guards Parade. He stood at a respectful distance and watched the guards perform their duties with quiet professionalism. He saw tourists taking pictures and behaving properly, maintaining appropriate boundaries and showing respect for the ceremony they were witnessing. Marcus noticed Trooper Harrison at his post, sitting perfectly still on Wellington while tourists gathered around for photos. The guard showed no sign of recognizing Marcus, maintaining his professional focus on his duties. But Marcus felt a sense of appreciation and respect for the dedication and discipline that Harrison demonstrated every day. Before leaving London, Marcus purchased several books about British military history and the Queen's Guard traditions. He planned to share these with friends and family back home, hoping to help other potential tourists understand the significance of what they might encounter during visits to the UK. The flight home gave Marcus time to reflect on his experience. He had come to London looking for adventure and memorable photos to share on social media. Instead, he had learned profound lessons about respect, responsibility, and the consequences of thoughtless actions. His phone contained no pictures of himself touching a Queen's Guard horse, but it held something more valuable: the contact information of people who had helped him grow as a person. Back in Chicago, Coos found that his story had become well known among his friends and coworkers. Some people thought his punishment had been too harsh for such a simple mistake, but Marcus disagreed. He understood now that some mistakes require serious consequences to ensure they aren't repeated. Marcus began volunteering with a local organization that helped prepare American tourists for international travel. He gave presentations about cultural awareness and the importance of researching local customs before visiting foreign countries. His story about the Queen's Guard horse became a powerful example of how quickly a fun vacation could turn into a serious legal problem. The most important thing I learned, Marcus would tell his audiences, is that other people's traditions and institutions deserve respect even if you don't fully understand them at first. Taking 5 minutes to read about the Queen's Guard before I visited could have saved me weeks of trouble and thousands of dollars. Marcus also stayed in touch with Trooper Harrison through email. The guard appreciated Marcus's efforts to educate other tourists and occasionally shared stories about positive interactions he had with respectful visitors. Their correspondence helped Marcus understand that most tourists behaved appropriately and that his incident, while serious, was not typical. A year after his London experience, Marcus received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a photograph of Wellington, the horse he had touched, along with a note from Trooper Harrison. The photo showed Wellington in full ceremonial dress, standing proudly at Horse Guards Parade during a special ceremony. "Dear Marcus," the note read, "I wanted you to see Wellington at his best, performing the duties he was trained for. He's doing well and continues to serve with distinction. Your efforts to educate other tourists have been noticed and appreciated. Thank you for turning a difficult situation into something positive." The photograph became one of Marcus's most treasured possessions, not because it reminded him of his mistake, but because it represented the growth and understanding that had come from accepting responsibility for his actions. He had it framed and placed it in his office, where it served as a daily reminder of the lessons he had learned about respect, consequences, and personal responsibility. Marcus's story eventually reached a wider audience when a British documentary crew contacted him about including his experience in a program about tourist incidents at royal sites. He agreed to participate, hoping that sharing his story on television might prevent other people from making similar mistakes. During the filming, Marcus returned to London for the first time since his extended stay, standing once again at Horse Guards Parade, but this time, as an educated and respectful visitor, he felt a deep appreciation for the traditions he was witnessing. The guards, the horses, and the ceremony all had new meaning for him now that he understood their historical and cultural significance. Looking back, Marcus said to the documentary cameras, I realized that my real mistake wasn't just touching the horse. My real mistake was traveling to another country without taking the time to understand and respect the culture I was visiting. I was so focused on getting the perfect photo for social media that I forgot I was a guest in someone else's home. The documentary aired on British television and was later shown on travel programs around the world. Marcus received hundreds of messages from people who said his story had changed how they approached international travel. Many wrote to thank him for his honesty in sharing such an embarrassing experience in order to help others avoid similar problems. 5 years after his original incident, Marcus had become something of an expert on cultural travel awareness. He had written articles for travel magazines, spoken at tourism conferences, and helped develop educational materials for travelers visiting the UK. His single moment of poor judgment had transformed into a lifelong commitment to promoting respectful and informed tourism. Most importantly, Marcus had maintained his friendship with Trooper Harrison, who had retired from the Queen's Guard and become a civilian instructor for military history programs. They met whenever Marcus visited London, and Harrison often shared Marcus's story with new guards as an example of how education and understanding could turn a negative incident into a positive outcome. Marcus never did get the dramatic social media photo he had originally wanted from his London trip, but he got something far more valuable: a deep understanding of respect, responsibility, and the power of learning from mistakes. His story had become a reminder that the most meaningful travel experiences often come not from the pictures we take, but from the lessons we learn and the connections we make with people from different cultures. The young construction manager who had thoughtlessly reached out to touch a Queen's Guard horse had grown into a mature advocate for cultural understanding and responsible tourism. His moment of regret at Horse Guards Parade had become a lifetime of purpose, helping others avoid his mistakes and appreciate the rich traditions that make international travel so rewarding when approached with proper respect and understanding.